Hello and welcome to Tabletop Oddity. My name is Jane. In this video I'm going to talk about why Games Workshop aren't worried about Star Wars Legion, and actually why this double whammy of a new edition of Warhammer 40k and the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic around the world is a bit of a double whammy for FFG and Star Wars Legion. One that it's going to be a tough challenge, I think, for the game to remain as popular as it was or is before the new edition. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. So for those of you who don't know, I'm sure a lot of you follow wargaming news, especially when it comes to the biggest competitor to the game that we're talking about. So I'm presuming a lot of you know about this. And so basically in probably the end of July this year, there's going to be a new edition of Warhammer 40,000, right? There's a box set. Nobody really knows the price of this box set, by the way, so we think it might be quite high. But yeah, so there's a box set with some cool miniatures. If you're interested in 40k, you might be interested in this. Games Workshop, on the other hand, I think, I was curious if they would make any changes because of Star Wars Legion, right? And it looks that they may have made one change, but they are verbally saying they pretty much haven't. So what am I talking about, right? So on the stream where they announced the new edition of 40k, they said, I'm going to laugh at this because I don't believe it myself. They said, we have the best game system in the world. Now, what they actually have is the most popular game system. I wouldn't personally not classify it as the best. This was when they were asked if they were going to change the turn order or mess about with the turn sequence, and that was their response. So we don't see any reason to change it. We're the most popular game, we're the best game kind of thing. Now, obviously, they are going to say that, but for me, I do everything and then you do everything. I mention it almost, probably, it feels like almost every video. I don't think that's the best gaming system in the world. I was thinking about this. What if chess adopted that as a strategy? And then I was like, actually, that would be quite cool. So I'm not sure it really helps my argument. But yeah, on a general principle, they're making overtures to try and fix that imbalance of I do everything on my first turn. There are games like AOS is apparently not as bad as 40k for it, but they're going to change the missions, so maybe it's actually advantageous in some ways to go second. But I also think it's not, well, if it's not balanced, then it's at least not fun because you're not really actively participating. Yeah, you're making the odd okay, I'll block that, or I'll try and block your spells or whatever. But you're not really that involved. You're just rolling dice, basically, not making any decisions. Well, you can be thinking about next turn, but in theory, it's not boom, boom, boom. So for me, I don't like that turn system. But the fact that they said it is obviously what they're going to say. But for me, it sort of showed at one level that they weren't worried about Star Wars Legion as a competitor. Now that's important, I think. It's how Games Workshop are viewing their competition. Because if they were, do I think they might have changed it? Maybe. On the other hand, they started working on this edition, I think they said almost as soon as the previous one was released. Now that was, I think, 3 years ago, so before Legion had come out. So they were working on the new edition before Legion had come out. So I personally think that, on the other hand, they're obviously saying they're not worried, but on the other hand, they don't have playing with a little bit of polystyrene. I do apologise, but they wouldn't have had time to have reacted, basically, before the 9th edition. And I also have that little thing in the back of my head that says, actually, why would they generally do one big edition at every other edition? So this one is sort of like a evolution rather than revolution. It could actually be the next one, 10th edition, where they maybe reset the whole thing. And maybe at that point, they could go to an alternating activating thing, which I know is a big sticking point for a lot of you guys, and it personally is for me. However, saying all of that as well, I am actually going to try and get into a little bit of 40k, which I've been speaking about on my other channel, Rage Crit. And the reason being isn't the massive big tournament games, because if I'm going to do that, I'll play Legion. That's just the fact. I'd rather go and play a Legion event than a 40k event. Well, to my knowledge as of right now. But they may have taken a little bit of a leaf out of Legion's book and gone with a skirmish mode. Now, it's something they already had, so it's not like it's I'm not saying they copied, but there's a possibility that they've done this, focusing a little bit more on it because of Legion. And that's the 500-point combat patrol missions. the fact that they are more clearly creating missions and targeting this 500 point model range. Obviously, 500 points is probably like a quarter of a big 2,000 point game, but I suspect it won't be a quarter of the time. So, make of that what you will. To me, that's sort of possibly not a reaction, but maybe related to the success of Skirmish. That basically you had one war game in Legion where you could do your big game, you can do your small game, and it's the same models, it's the same units, it's the same points, etc., etc., etc. The rules sort of change depending on your missions, but really it's the same kind of game, but speedier and a bit smaller. So for me, I think they could have done a little bit of something because of Star Wars Legion. But I haven't looked at the stats lately in terms of sales. I would not be surprised if 40k had been dominant up until possibly the Clone Wars, where the Clone Wars really seemed to be triggering the community. Like, it felt like we were reinvigorated because we had more factions, so it makes sense, more variety, it makes sense, and it felt like we were pumping it back up. And then we had obviously the world situation, and I think this is a double whammy for Legion, I said right at the start, because it sort of reduced the impact of the Clone Wars. We didn't get to see them at Worlds at LVO. Is it LVO? Adepticon? Whichever one it was, sorry, I can't remember. We didn't get to see them properly on the competitive stage, and nobody's properly... You may have played a game with your own housemate or something like that, but nobody's properly played a game now in like 3 months, apart from online, which, FFG obviously doesn't condone, but we've not played in person for a while. So that's taken the sting out of it, and the fact that then we're leading straight into a new edition of its main competitor. Yikes, that's a tough one. Games Workshop pretty much back and running. They're manufacturing in the UK, so they've got pretty much full control. They do like 80% or 90% of the manufacturing in the UK, and obviously we've had strictish like lockdown conditions, but when they're up kind of thing. And they probably had this planned even before that. These were probably printed jonks ago, so that I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But yeah, we've had COVID, which is sort of like taking the sting out of the attack, and then the biggest competitor is releasing a new edition. All the while, FFG have been stum for ages. I don't think we've had an article for ages, right? Which isn't necessarily a problem. I completely understand. I'm not like having to go at them or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, but it depends how FFG react now. When the manufacturing's back open in China, their design obviously will have kept going. I can't remember what I was predicting, but we're going to get some new announcements soon. Probably Anakin. That's all I keep thinking about, because it's weird that we've not got him. But we're going to get those new announcements. It sort of depends how quickly we start getting the new releases. And will they try and do something to take the sting out of 9th edition? Personally, I think that would be a drop in the ocean. It'd be too little, not too late, but it'd be too little to really sway anything. So I don't think FFG can really turn the tide. If I'm honest, at this point, for Legion and possibly other FFG games, I think what they need is 40k to be a bit poop. Well, they don't need it, but it'd be helpful. And then maybe like 2 months, 3 months after the fact, they have a big announcement and a big reveal, sub-factions or the new factions, First Orders, Scum Villainy, something like that. We could do something big. Because everybody thought the 9th edition of 40k was coming probably since like last November or something, I think, with the rumours. So that's the thing. So that's my point. The whole purpose of this video is, I think, Games Workshop, they're not worried mostly about Star Wars Legion, or at least they say they're not. And the evidence... there is no real evidence, but there is. They've done the little combat patrol, which could be a little bit about skirmish, and then ultimately, I think my question's a bit moot because they just started designing this before Legion had hit the shelves. So I will expect if Legion becomes if Games Workshop feel like Legion is a proper challenger and they think, our rule set is a little bit archaic and we need to change it, then I think the next edition will be when we see that. So in another 3 years' time, I think the next 3 years, possibly the most decisive time for the biggest game in the tabletop market. But we will see if that appears to be true. And then COVID took the sting out of the Clone Wars. Then you're going to go into a new edition. That's going to be a problem. And I feel like FFG are going to need I don't know. We need like they need like their own show, maybe like instead of Gen Con or whatever, and have it to be like, these are all of our big, cool ass mother flipping releases for all of our Star Wars games. That's what I think they're going to need to do. And yeah, that's it. Let me know your thoughts. Are you interested in 40k, the 500-point combat patrol missions? Get over to Rage Quit, guys, because I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm still playing big 40k, big Star Wars Legion. However, when it came to Star Wars Legion, I've actually, I had some Clone Wars boxes, I got rid of them. I sold them on basically because I realised I just don't have the time. I'm just going to concentrate on like one faction, probably the Imperials, maybe the Rebels because they're half built. But yeah, I'm just going to try and concentrate on them. Let me know your thoughts about 40k. Let me know your thoughts about the future of Star Wars Legion. I do hope you have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.